February 19, 1943, a factory floor in Green River Ordnance Plant, Illinois. Vesta Stout's fingers ached from packing ammunition boxes, but her mind burned with a problem that could kill her sons. The tape sealing these boxes, paper-based, government standard, failed under pressure, ripped when wet, cost precious seconds that soldiers couldn't afford in combat. Her two boys were serving overseas, and she knew what a jammed ammunition box meant in the chaos of battle. So, that evening, after her shift ended, she did something extraordinary for a factory worker in wartime America. She wrote directly to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Before we go further, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. And if you want to see more hidden history like this, hit that like button and subscribe. Now back to Vesta's letter. Her proposal was simple. Replace the paper tape with strong fabric tape coated in waterproof adhesive. The War Production Board read her letter. Within months, Revolite, a division of Johnson & Johnson, had developed exactly what she described, a strong, cloth-backed, waterproof tape soldiers would call duct tape for its water-shedding properties, later corrupted to duct tape. By June of 1944, millions of feet of the stuff were being shipped to every front. Vesta Stout never saw a penny from her invention, but she had unknowingly created one of the most versatile tools in modern history. Her story reveals a profound truth hidden in plain sight. The objects you use today, the microwave that heated your breakfast, the pen you clicked absent-mindedly during a meeting, the aerosol deodorant you sprayed this morning, were born not from peacetime innovation, but from wartime desperation. Between 1939 and 1945, the Second World War consumed nearly 70% of global GDP in military spending. Every factory, every laboratory, every engineering mind bent toward a single purpose: survival. But survival demanded innovation at a scale humanity had never attempted. In Britain, civilian rationing began in January of 1940. By 1942, the average weekly ration consisted of 2 ounces of butter, 4 ounces of margarine, 2 ounces of tea, 8 ounces of sugar, and a single egg. Citizens carried gas masks in cardboard boxes as casually as modern commuters carry phones. Gardens transformed into victory gardens, producing nearly 40% of vegetables consumed across the United States by 1943. Metal pots, old tires, even animal bones, all recycled for war production. Britain collected over 1 million tons of scrap metal in 1941 alone. This was the world that forged your present. The transformation touched everything. In 1942, the United States War Production Board halted all civilian automobile manufacturing. Ford, Chevrolet, Chrysler companies, synonymous with American mobility, stopped making cars entirely. Their assembly lines retooled for tanks, jeeps, and bombers. By 1943, U.S. factories produced a new aircraft every 5 minutes. Every 5 minutes. Women filled the gaps left by deployed men. By 1944, 1 in 3 American workers were women, immortalized in the iconic image of Rosie the Riveter. They welded bomber fuselages, operated massive industrial presses, and managed production lines that operated around the clock. Their hands literally built the arsenal of democracy. But they also built something else, the foundation of your modern convenience. Consider the ballpoint pen you probably own. Hungarian inventor Laszlo Biro perfected it in 1938. But it gained mass adoption through Allied pilots who discovered traditional fountain pens leaked at high altitude. The pressurized cabin, developed for those same high-altitude bombers, became the standard for every commercial airliner you've ever flown. The aerosol spray can, invented in 1941 by American soldiers who needed portable insect repellent in the Pacific, now dispenses everything from cooking oil to spray paint. Even your morning coffee traces back to war. The U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps pioneered instant coffee and powdered eggs, technologies that became foundational to the modern convenience food industry. Soldiers complained that instant coffee tasted like liquid mud, but it didn't spoil, didn't require brewing equipment, and could be prepared in seconds under combat conditions. Function over flavor, survival over satisfaction. The acrid smell of burning rubber and oil hung over bombed factories. Civilians described it as a metallic fog that clung to the throat. In rationed British kitchens, stewed nettles and carrot marmalade replaced pre-war delicacies. Woolton pie, a bland mixture of vegetables and oatmeal, became the national dish, named after the Minister of Food. The texture of scarcity shaped an entire generation's palate and expectations. Meanwhile, in secret laboratories scattered across Britain and America, scientists worked on technologies that would reshape the post-war world. Radar, first developed in Britain's Bawdsey Manor, helped win the Battle of Britain in 1940. Today, every airport, every weather forecast, every maritime navigation system relies on its descendants. But radar's most unexpected legacy appeared in 1945 when Percy Spencer, an engineer at Raytheon, noticed a candy bar in his pocket had melted while standing near radar equipment. That accidental observation led directly to the microwave oven, which would revolutionize home cooking 2 decades later. War accelerates everything, including accidents that change history. Superglue emerged from attempts to make clear gun sights. Teflon was discovered while developing gas seals for uranium enrichment. Synthetic rubber, developed after Japanese forces cut off natural rubber supplies from Southeast Asia, now forms the basis of modern tires, medical gloves, and athletic equipment. The jerrycan, originally a German military innovation copied by the Allies, remains the worldwide standard for portable fuel storage. These weren't deliberate consumer products. They were desperate improvisations that happened to outlive the crisis that spawned them. But here's the question that haunts this history. If wartime scarcity created such abundance of innovation, what does that say about peacetime waste? The soldiers using Vesta Stout's duct tape in 1944 couldn't know they were handling the prototype for a tool that would fix everything from spacecraft to wedding dresses. The British radar operators tracking Luftwaffe bombers couldn't imagine their screens would one day cook baked potatoes. The exhausted factory workers packaging sea rations had no idea they were designing the blueprint for backpacking meals and emergency food supplies. They were just trying to survive the next day. Yet their survival created your comfort. May 8, 1940, a research laboratory in Oxford, England. Howard Florey and his team injected 8 mice with lethal doses of Streptococcus bacteria, then treated 4 of them with a brownish mold extract. By the next morning, the untreated mice were dead. The treated mice were alive, active, and seemingly healthy. Penicillin had just passed its first clinical trial. What happened next would transform medicine forever. And it started with bedpans, bathtubs, and an industrial mobilization that treated human life as the most valuable resource worth saving. Before penicillin reached the battlefield, infection killed more soldiers than bullets. A minor wound could fester into sepsis. A simple cut became a death sentence. The war demanded a solution, and it demanded it at a scale never attempted in pharmaceutical history. The challenge wasn't discovering penicillin. Alexander Fleming had done that accidentally in 1928. The challenge was mass-producing enough to treat millions of wounded soldiers. British labs could barely produce enough for a handful of patients. So in 1941, Florey traveled to America with a culture of Penicillium notatum hidden in the lining of his coat, desperate to find industrial capacity that Britain lacked. American pharmaceutical companies transformed agriculture into medicine. Deep fermentation tanks, originally designed for brewing beer, were repurposed to grow massive quantities of penicillin mold. Corn-steeped liquor, a waste product from cornstarch factories, proved to be the perfect growing medium. By 1943, American factories produced enough penicillin to treat every wounded Allied soldier. By 1944, production reached 2.3 million doses per month. Infection deaths among Allied troops dropped by 80%. Field medics carried sulfur powder in their first aid kits. Soldiers called it magic dust for its infection-fighting properties. The powder had a distinctive chemical smell, sharp and medicinal, that became synonymous with survival. Wounded men who smelled that powder being sprinkled into their wounds knew they might live another day. The texture of those field dressings, rough canvas soaked in sulfur solution, represented the thin barrier between life and gangrene. But penicillin changed the entire calculus of combat medicine. A soldier in Italy wrote in his diary in 1944, "The medic gave me a shot of penicillin, said it was worth more than gold. 3 days later, my wound stopped weeping. A week after that, I was back with my unit. Before this war, I would have lost the leg, probably lost my life." Modern antibiotics trace their lineage directly to that wartime urgency. The mass production techniques developed for penicillin became the template for pharmaceutical manufacturing worldwide. Every antibiotic prescribed today, every infection prevented, every surgical procedure made safe, stands on foundations laid by scientists racing against combat casualties. The war didn't just save lives in the moment, it created the infrastructure to save lives for generations. Meanwhile, another revolution was unfolding in the form of a synthetic fiber that would change fashion, industry, and even romance. Nylon stockings, originally launched by DuPont in 1939, caused shopping riots. 4 million pairs sold in the first 4 days. Women lined up for blocks. The stockings were sheer, durable, and unlike anything silk or cotton could match. Then the war came, and overnight, Nylon disappeared from consumer shelves. The same polymer that made stockings so desirable made even better parachutes, ropes, and aircraft tires. Every pound of nylon went to military production. Women across America and Britain painted seams on the backs of their bare legs to simulate stocking lines, maintaining the appearance of luxury they could no longer afford. Some used gravy browning to tint their skin, others drew lines with eyebrow pencils. The absence of nylon became as defining as its presence had been. Factory workers who had once stitched stockings now wove parachute canopies. The same DuPont plant in Seaford, Delaware, that had produced 4 million pairs of stockings in 1940 now produced millions of yards of parachute silk, except it wasn't silk anymore. It was nylon, stronger, more reliable, and fully synthetic. American paratroopers jumping over Normandy on June 6, 1944, trusted their lives to the same material that had once made women's legs look elegant at parties. This was the dual nature of wartime innovation, the same technology that adorned also protected, the same fiber that signaled beauty also saved lives. After the war ended, the return of nylon stockings caused another shopping frenzy. In Pittsburgh, 40,000 women lined up outside a single department store. In one San Francisco riot, police had to be called when demand exceeded supply. The stockings represented normalcy, femininity, and peace, everything the war had suspended. But nylon never stopped being a military technology. Today, it forms the basis of industrial ropes, climbing gear, automotive components, and countless other applications. That first synthetic polymer proved that chemistry could replace natural materials entirely, opening the door to plastics, polyester, and the synthetic material revolution of the late 20th century. Scarcity had forced innovation. Abundance followed inevitably. The Jeep told a similar story of military necessity becoming civilian ubiquity. Developed in 1940 by Willys Overland Motors, the Willys MB became the first modern all-terrain vehicle. The U.S. Army needed a light reconnaissance vehicle that could traverse mud, sand, snow, and rubble. It needed to be simple enough for field repairs, tough enough to survive combat conditions, and cheap enough to mass produce. Willys delivered all of that in a vehicle weighing just 2,300 pounds. Soldiers loved it. General George C. Marshall called it America's greatest contribution to modern warfare. Ernie Pyle, the legendary war correspondent, wrote, "It did everything. It went everywhere, was as faithful as a dog, as strong as a mule, and as agile as a goat." Over 600,000 Jeeps were manufactured during the war. They hauled supplies, mounted machine guns, evacuated wounded soldiers, and became the workhorse of Allied logistics. The sound of a Jeep engine became the sound of American mobility, a distinctive throaty rumble that meant supplies were coming, reinforcements were arriving, salvation was possible. After the war, soldiers returned home with memories of those versatile vehicles. Willys began producing civilian versions, sparking an entirely new automotive category. The modern SUV, the pickup truck culture, the very concept of recreational off-roading, all traced back to military engineers, designing a vehicle to survive the worst conditions Earth could offer. You drive its descendants today without thinking about the mud, blood, and desperation that shaped its design. But perhaps the most ordinary object with the most extraordinary backstory sat in every Allied bomber crew's survival kit. The humble ballpoint pen. Traditional fountain pens leaked at altitude, rendering them useless for navigators and pilots who needed to make calculations at 30,000 feet. Laszlo Biro's ballpoint design solved that problem with a simple innovation, a rotating ball bearing in the pen's tip that distributed thick, quick-drying ink. The Royal Air Force ordered 30,000 pens in 1943. Within 2 years, ballpoint pens became standard military equipment. After the war, they flooded the civilian market, eventually replacing fountain pens almost entirely. Today, billions of ballpoint pens are manufactured annually, most costing less than $1. A wartime necessity became so cheap and ubiquitous that we barely register its existence. That's the pattern repeating endlessly throughout this history. Military innovation, civilian adoption, eventual invisibility through commonplace use. The technologies born from conflict became so thoroughly integrated into daily life that their origins faded into obscurity. But those origins matter. They reveal something fundamental about human ingenuity under pressure. When resources vanish, creativity explodes. When survival hangs in the balance, impossible problems suddenly yield solutions. The war forced millions of people to reimagine what was possible, what was necessary, and what could be built if only the need was urgent enough. The question becomes, what could we create if we treated peacetime problems with wartime urgency? October 9, 1945, Percy Spencer stood in a Raytheon laboratory in Massachusetts, testing a magnetron, the heart of military radar systems. In his pocket, A chocolate bar slowly melted into a sticky mess. Spencer pulled out the ruined candy, confused. The lab wasn't particularly warm. Then he noticed the magnetron still running beside him, its electromagnetic waves pulsing invisibly through the air. He grabbed a bag of popcorn kernels, held them near the magnetron, and watched them explode into white puffs within seconds. The microwave oven had just been accidentally invented. This wasn't unique. The war spawned dozens of technologies through mistakes, coincidences, and desperate improvisations that scientists later refined into consumer products. The history of modern convenience is littered with beautiful accidents that occurred when brilliant minds operated under impossible pressure, working with unfamiliar materials, chasing solutions to problems that couldn't wait for proper research timelines. Spencer's melted chocolate represented a pattern repeated across Allied laboratories. Military technology bleeding into civilian life through unexpected channels. The first commercial microwave oven, the Radar Range, stood nearly 6 feet tall, weighed 750 pounds, and cost $5,000, about $70,000 in today's money. It was marketed to restaurants and ships in 1947. Nobody imagined it would eventually sit on every kitchen counter, reheating leftovers in 90 seconds. The distinctive hum of a microwave, that electrical whir that signals convenience, carries the ghost of radar systems that once scanned skies for enemy bombers. The smell of electronics heating up, that sharp, almost acrid scent, links your kitchen directly to wartime radar stations where operators watch glowing green screens for incoming threats. But radar gave the world more than microwaves. The technology developed at Britain's Bawdsey Manor in the late 1930s became the foundation for air traffic control. Weather forecasting, maritime navigation, and eventually speed cameras and automatic door openers. The flickering blue glow of radar screens, accompanied by the smell of heated vacuum tubes and ozone, marked the birth of electronic surveillance and remote sensing. Every time you check a weather forecast, you're using radar's children. The war compressed decades of potential research into months of frantic necessity. Superglue, cyanoacrylate adhesive, emerged from attempts to make clear plastic gun sights in 1942. Dr. Harry Coover of Eastman Kodak was testing various materials when he discovered a formulation that bonded instantly to everything it touched. It was useless for gun sights, too sticky, impossible to work with, so he shelved it. 7 years later, working on a different project, Coover rediscovered the formula and recognized its commercial potential. By the 1950s, superglue was being marketed to consumers. Today, it's used in everything from medical sutures to forensic science, with global sales exceeding $1 billion annually. A wartime failure became a peacetime miracle. The same pattern repeated with synthetic rubber. When Japan seized Southeast Asian rubber plantations in 1942, the United States faced catastrophic shortages. Natural rubber was essential for tires, gaskets, seals, hoses, everything that made machines mobile and functional. The military needed 50,000 tons of rubber monthly just to maintain operations. American chemists, working under the Rubber Reserve Company, synthesized entirely new polymers in months. By 1944, American factories produced over 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber annually, exceeding all natural rubber production in human history. The rubber had a distinctive chemical smell, sharper and more industrial than the earthy scent of natural latex, but it worked. Soldiers' boots, airplane tires, tank treads, all depended on chemistry replacing agriculture. Today, synthetic rubber accounts for roughly 70% of global rubber production. Your car tires, your shoe soles, your weather stripping, all descendants of wartime desperation. But some wartime innovations went beyond materials into realms that would reshape human thought itself. At Bletchley Park in England, a team of mathematicians and engineers built Colossus in 1943, the world's first programmable digital computer. Its purpose was singular: break German military codes. The machine was massive, filling an entire room, consuming enough electricity to power a small town, generating heat that required constant ventilation. The smell of Colossus, hot metal, electrical insulation, and paper tape burning through readers at high speed was the smell of the information age being born. Colossus operators, predominantly women, fed encrypted messages into the machine and waited for patterns to emerge. The rhythmic clacking of relay switches and the whir of paper tape readers created a mechanical symphony that meant Nazi communications were being decoded in real time. The technology remained classified until the 1970s, but its influence spread invisibly through engineers who had worked on the project and applied those lessons to post-war computing. Every smartphone, every laptop, every digital device traces its ancestry back to that code-breaking room. The war also revolutionized food preservation in ways that shaped modern eating habits across the globe. Sea rations, canned combat meals designed for American soldiers, pioneered shelf-stable food that required no refrigeration and minimal preparation. The cans had a metallic tang that soldiers joked tasted like tinfoil and glue, but they provided complete nutrition in portable, durable packages. Post-war camping meals, emergency food supplies, even astronaut food borrowed directly from sea ration technology. The modern backpacking industry exists because military quartermasters needed to feed soldiers in jungles, deserts, and frozen mountains. Spam, canned pork shoulder, and ham became perhaps the most famous military ration. Over 100 million pounds shipped to Allied forces during the war. Soldiers despised it. They wrote poems mocking it, invented countless derogatory nicknames, and swore they'd never eat it again after the war ended. Yet Spam became a cultural icon in Hawaii and Korea, where American military presence introduced local populations to the cheap, shelf-stable protein. Today, Hawaiians consume more Spam per capita than any other population on Earth. A wartime necessity became a regional delicacy. Instant coffee told a similar story. The U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps mass-produced soluble coffee that could be prepared with just hot water, critical when combat conditions prevented traditional brewing. Soldiers complained it tasted like liquid mud, but it didn't spoil, didn't require equipment, and delivered caffeine when exhaustion threatened effectiveness. The technique, refined through industrial-scale testing, became the foundation for Nescafe, Folgers Instant, and countless other brands. Your morning convenience traces back to soldiers who needed alertness more than flavor. Even warfare's tools found peaceful purposes. Duct tape, born from Vesta Stout's letter and manufactured in millions of yards, saw use far beyond ammunition boxes. Soldiers used it to repair jeeps, seal leaking canteens, patch torn uniforms, waterproof equipment, and improvise solutions to countless field problems. The fabric texture under fingers, sticky with adhesive resin, became the tactile symbol of improvisation itself. After the war, contractors discovered it was perfect for sealing heating ducts, hence the name shift from duct tape to duct tape. Though ironically, modern HVAC professionals recommend against using it on actual ducts because heat degrades the adhesive. Nevertheless, duct tape became the universal, quick-fix tool, equally at home in toolboxes, spacecraft, and disaster relief kits. NASA astronauts used duct tape to repair the lunar rover on Apollo 17. Fashion designers use it to create emergency alterations. The U.S. military still issues it in every field kit. Annual global sales exceed $200 million. A mother's concern for her sons became humanity's favorite improvisation tool. But here's what makes these stories remarkable. None of these inventors knew they were building the future. Percy Spencer just wanted to understand why his chocolate melted. Harry Coover was trying to make gun sights. Vesta Stout wanted to protect her boys. They weren't visionaries predicting post-war consumer trends. They were problem solvers addressing immediate crises, yet their solutions outlived the crisis by decades, shaping a world they couldn't imagine. What other solutions to modern problems are we overlooking because we lack sufficient urgency to find them? August 6, 1958. A housewife in suburban Cleveland opened her brand new General Electric microwave oven, placed a frozen dinner inside, and pressed a button. 13 years after Percy Spencer's chocolate bar melted, the technology that had tracked enemy bombers was now reheating leftovers. The war had come home, not in trauma or memory, but in the objects that filled everyday life. Walk through your home right now. Truly look at what surrounds you. That pressure cooker on your shelf derives from high-altitude cooking research conducted for bomber crews. The ballpoint pen on your desk flew combat missions over Europe. The synthetic fabric in your clothing replaced materials blockaded by wartime enemies. The aerosol can in your bathroom started as Pacific Theater insect repellent. Even the fluorescent lights overhead evolved from blackout-era research into energy-efficient illumination. Your entire domestic landscape is a museum of wartime innovation that forgot it was at war. The canned food in your pantry uses sealing technology perfected for sea rations. The plastic containers storing your leftovers descend from bakelite and early polymers developed when metal became too precious for civilian use. The aluminum foil wrapping your sandwich emerged from aircraft manufacturing techniques. The instant coffee in your cupboard was born in quartermaster laboratories, trying to keep soldiers alert in foxholes. Even your morning routine is choreographed by World War II. The most profound transformation wasn't technological, it was philosophical. Before the war, innovation followed a predictable pattern: incremental improvements, cautious investment, slow adoption. Peacetime allowed for deliberation, market testing, gradual refinement. Companies could spend years developing products, decades establishing markets. The war obliterated that timeline. When British radar engineers needed to track incoming bombers, they couldn't wait for a committee to study feasibility. When American factories needed to produce aircraft, they couldn't conduct multi-year market research. When medics needed to stop soldiers from dying of infected wounds, they couldn't run traditional pharmaceutical trials. The urgency compressed innovation cycles from decades to months, from years to weeks, sometimes from months to days. Vesta Stout's duct tape went from presidential letter to mass production in under 6 months. Penicillin went from laboratory curiosity to industrial-scale production in under 2 years. The Jeep went from design concept to battlefield deployment in under 12 months. Nylon transitioned from consumer product to military necessity to consumer product again in the span of 5 years. This was innovation at a pace peacetime had never attempted. The lesson embedded in your daily objects is simple but disturbing. Humanity solves problems fastest when survival depends on it. We built the modern world not through careful planning but through desperate improvisation. The microwave, the computer, synthetic materials, mass antibiotics, ballpoint pens, instant food, all emerged because millions of people faced a binary choice between innovation and annihilation. They chose innovation. You inherited the results. But the story doesn't end with gratitude for convenient appliances. It forces an uncomfortable question. What problems could we solve today if we treated them with wartime urgency? Climate change threatens human civilization, yet our response unfolds at peacetime pace. Antibiotic resistance could return us to a pre-penicillin world, yet pharmaceutical development follows traditional timelines. Hunger persists despite agricultural abundance, yet food distribution systems evolve incrementally. The objects in your home prove we can move faster when we choose to. Consider what happened when COVID-19 forced pharmaceutical companies to develop vaccines with unusual speed. The same scientific community that typically required a decade to produce vaccines delivered multiple options in under a year. Critics called it reckless until they realized the techniques, mRNA technology, parallel trial phases, advanced manufacturing, had been developing for decades, waiting for sufficient urgency to overcome bureaucratic caution. Wartime innovation didn't end in 1945. It just went dormant, waiting for the next crisis to revive it. The veterans who returned home carrying duct tape, using ballpoint pens, and trusting penicillin rarely spoke about these objects' origins. They integrated seamlessly into civilian life, their military ancestry fading into obscurity. By the 1960s, teenagers using aerosol hairspray had no idea they were wielding Pacific theater technology. By the 1970s, families heating TV dinners in microwaves didn't connect the appliance to radar stations. By the 1980s, children playing with super soakers, which used NASA-inspired pressure technology, never heard about gun sight adhesive experiments. The objects became invisible through ubiquity. That invisibility carries both comfort and danger. Comfort because it means the trauma of wartime transformed into the convenience of peacetime, a genuine alchemy of suffering into abundance. Danger because forgetting origins means forgetting lessons. The war proved that impossible problems yield to sufficient urgency, that resource constraints force creative solutions, that collaboration at scale produces miracles. We proved we could rebuild the world when we had to. The final irony is that many wartime innovations succeeded precisely because they ignored conventional wisdom. Microwave cooking seemed absurd. Heating food with radar waves, mass-producing penicillin from mold seemed impossible. Industrial-scale fungus farming, synthetic rubber seemed inferior. Chemistry replacing nature. Duct tape seemed too simple, just fabric and adhesive. But conventional wisdom is a peacetime luxury. Wartime demands results over respectability. Today you'll use a dozen objects born from that urgency. You'll click a ballpoint pen without thinking of altitude leaks. You'll seal a package with duct tape without remembering ammunition boxes. You'll microwave lunch without connecting it to melted chocolate in a radar lab. You'll take antibiotics without contemplating the wounded soldiers who first received penicillin in field hospitals. The war surrounds you in invisible domesticity. But here's what the objects can't tell you. They represent choices. Choices to prioritize innovation over procedure, solutions over profits, collaboration over competition, speed over caution. Those choices weren't comfortable. They required sacrifice, risk, and accepting that some experiments would fail spectacularly. But they also required belief that impossible problems become possible when enough brilliant minds focus on solving them. We made those choices once, under duress. We could make them again, by choice. The duct tape holding together your shipping box is really holding together a question. If a factory worker's letter could change military logistics and spawn a universal tool, what could your ideas accomplish with proper urgency? If accidental discoveries during desperate times created antibiotics, microwaves, and computers? What intentional research during peaceful times could create? The war ended in 1945. Its inventions surround you in 2025, 80 years later, still functional, still essential, still mostly invisible. They serve as both comfort and challenge, proof that we already know how to solve impossible problems, if only we decide they're urgent enough to matter. Vesta Stout wrote a letter to protect her sons. Percy Spencer investigated melted chocolate. Harry Coover accidentally invented superglue. None of them were trying to change the world. They were trying to solve immediate problems with available resources your home is furnished with. Their pragmatic desperation transformed into everyday convenience. The question isn't whether we can innovate at wartime speed. The objects around you prove we can. The question is whether we will. What problems we'll finally decide are urgent enough to deserve that level of focus, that scale of resources, that speed of transformation. The next time you tear off a strip of duct tape, remember, a mother's love for her deployed sons created that. Imagine what we could create if we loved our collective future that intensely. The war is over, its lessons remain, wrapped in fabric and sealed with adhesive, waiting in every drawer, cabinet, and closet of your life, waiting for you to remember that impossible was never real, only insufficiently urgent.